Also want to remind those on the phone, be a part of our lesson this morning. Susie and Lori, if you want to chime in at all this morning, please unmute yourself and you know, you're part of the study as well, and we invite you to provide comments and ask questions just as we do everybody in the audience. Last week we kind of introduced the subject of our children, our adult children that have left the church, or, you know, and they may have taken on another religious path, or they may have given up religion altogether, whether organized or not. They may have kind of let their faith disappear and have no interest in the gospel, no interest in being part of a church, whether it's this church or whether it's any other church. We identified scriptures that reminded us that, you know, as the parents, we're not going to be held accountable by God for the choices they make as an adult. Each soul is judged on its own merit, and each person shall give an account of himself to God. We read that our adult children have the same rights of free will and choice, just like we do. And while believers are you know, we're always encouraged to bear one another's burdens, but ultimately, who bears the load? The scriptures say that each person bears their own load. And we know from studying the history of the Israelites that God expressed his own grief and his own sadness when his children, and by the way, anger too. It wasn't just grief. It wasn't just sadness. It was abject anger. God expressed anger toward his own chosen people, his children, when they rebelled against him and turned away. And of course, we were reminded that God remains in control. God's in control over all creation. He is sovereign in all human affairs. God's will is the ultimate decider of any outcome, and we've got to trust in that. So I'm going to pause there and see if anyone has any comments or questions about what we covered last week. Is there anything that maybe you thought about bringing up and chose not to, or any comments that you'd like to make before we get started? What we're going to talk about now is what next? What next, Marshall?
I heard on the news this morning, and I just didn't get no details or nothing, but just happened to hear it. And it caught my ear a day late and a dollar short. But according to the news, Generation Z, and I don't know whose Generation Z is, quite honestly couldn't care. People are people. But are going to the Catholic Church. And I was wondering if anybody knows why.
I hadn't heard, had not read that, but you talking about in the United States, was it, or was that globally, or just in the U.S.? Because I think part of the U.S. now may be the fact that we have an American Pope. But I don't know. Just a thought. Chuck? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I wondered if it had to do with a new Pope.
Chuck?
I've been following the Catholic movement for a little bit here, and what I've noticed was that, first of all, the last Pope that was there abandoned ship and went out and started doing his own little ministry, and the ones that were subject to the right side of doing their faith was highly upset, and so he abandoned them because of their Latin worship. They were not too happy about him abandoning the Latin worship, so then he introduced homosexuality into their religion, which has been kind of creeping in anyway from the past. But real quick, they had noticed a big change, and the next thing you know, they had all kinds of wicked stuff coming in to their assemblies, and they weren't happy about that. And so I could see the movement going in. Well, you know, if you do that and you start to accept everybody and their brother, They're all gonna be moving in, you're gonna have a bigger, assembly than you did, because now you're allowing, what you believe was truth, a Pandora box open, and people just starting to flow in now from all kinds of atheistic, whatever belief. It's just a party now. So that's what happened. That's what I've been seeing happen anyway.
We do know that the Pope that just died a few short weeks ago was considered to be very liberal in his
Yes.
administration of the Catholic Church. And when it came down to I don't know the legal term for what the Catholic Church calls doctrine, but those things that the Pope has influence upon, he was pretty liberal. Like Chuck said, the Catholic doctrine that you read today is way different than it was 10 years ago. And Tammy, did you have a comment?
I was just gonna say that I just Googled it, just to see if we could get some context. And it said young men are increasingly drawn to Catholicism due to a number of factors, including a desire for structure, tradition, and a sense of purpose in a world that feels increasingly uncertain.
Now, that would address the right side of the
Right.
Catholic
Turning
faith.
back.
Yeah, because of this new Pope, he probably addressing some of these that were introduced to, the bad side of the effect, so.
There's absolutely no correlation in what I'm about to say between it and the Catholic Church. Absolutely none. But since you brought that up, Tammy, about young men, I don't know if you watch the news. I don't watch the news religiously, but if there's headlines out there about the military, I usually try to pay attention to them. But the Army is now reaching its recruiting goals far quicker than it has in the past several years. Why is that? Well, we can speculate. But what has changed in the last few months? In the military, it's a big change in the way the military is approaching the acceptance of certain things. And if you know, you probably know what they are. Okay, transgenderism, DEI, all those things that the headlines are calling out and talking about, how evil the military is now about not being inclusive. Well, the result of that is that they're recruiting more young men and women to serve. It has absolutely nothing to do with the Catholic Church. Just thought it's an interesting parallel. Just an interesting parallel. Any other comments?
And,
Chuck?
if I can inject a little bit of what you were saying there about the military, when I was getting out, it was horrible. First of all, you're subject to, like you said, I had a general. She passed away, but she was also homosexual, and she was out there trying to when you do roll call in the morning and you have that general up there and she's gonna give you she call to order, it just rubs me wrong. And because of the fact that here's a woman, it's not that she's a woman, but it's more that she's into this divisional understanding about marriage. And it just, a lot of us, I'm saying a lot of us across the board were, leading, it rubbed us wrong. But we were forced to accept that. I never accepted it because I'm a Christian, but, a lot of us, we, in policy, had to accept that. I can see why that would, like Tammy brought up, a lot of men left. A lot of people didn't want to be there anymore because things are just waxing worse and worse.
I think deep down people want structure, people want order, people want a differentiation between what's right and wrong. Not everything is right. There are, not everything falls into a shade of gray. there are things that are clearly right and there are things that are clearly wrong. And that may be part of what these young men are seeking. You know, it's been generations that have kind of wandered in the wilderness, so to speak, that everything's acceptable, there's no right and wrong in the world, and no matter what you choose to do, what you believe, it's okay. God still loves you. Well, maybe people are coming to their senses a little bit. Who knows? Anyway, let's get back. Let's go on with our lesson. So I asked the question, what next? You know, our children have left the church. They have made a choice. Some of you raised your hands last week and said that you left the church that your parents attended, that you didn't follow the same religious path that your parents did. Did they give up on you? Did they continue to try to convince you that maybe you needed to make a change, or did they try to continue to tell you why they believe in a certain way? Do we just withdraw and not discuss religious things with our children? Do we not bring up the message of the gospel? Did our parents stop doing that with us? Do we change at all how we feel about our kids because they don't believe as we do? Do they change how they feel about us? Do we continue to try to encourage them and nudge them? What do we do? How have you thought about that? If anybody wants to share about that, for those of you that have children that are outside the church, how do you handle that? Anyone?
Different with each child.
Okay. I agree with that. We can't cookie cutter them. Chuck?
I didn't hear.
Marshall said it would differ with each child.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. With my daughter, I don't want to pick on my daughter, but she was like the weakest one out of the bunch, and you can see that. And so it took her a long time to come to the faith, but we were persistent. We weren't. A lot of people say, "Hey, just tell me this. Stop shoving your religion down my throat." Because I was very vocal about it. I would hang it up in my office. People come in and, that's me. That's the way I was. I kind of didn't care, but that was wrong. But with my children now, I was more on the military side. I'd have to listen to my wife. She was more on the, hey, honey, you can't do that. And I'd have to straighten myself out. And I've noticed that with the church as years went by. A brother approached me, and it was in Bible study he approached me. You can't control people. And that's the way my life was throughout the military. You controlled people, or you were controlled. So I had to look at that, step back, and that really hit me in the head like a 2x4. And I thought, wow, I never thought of it like that. But yeah, where's that love? You know, the gentleness that the Lord wants us to approach people on. We don't, like I said, we don't shove it down their throat. So I backed off. I prayed for my daughter and approached her from a different side and said, sweetheart, we love you. We don't want to see you. I know you have this is your opportunity in this world to prove to either yourself or God. And so we would just gently talk to her, get her where she's very, very needed at times, or she's struggling, and that's when I would try to throw in the Lord with our conversation. So that's basically how, in prayers, we believe in prayers, so we believe that she came around because of that.
Chuck's touched on several things that we'll cover as we go through today's lesson. I do want to assign a couple scriptures, not as many as we did last week, but if you would permit me. Charles, I'm going to ask you, if you would, to read Mark 10, 21 and 22. Mark 10, 21 and 22. Fred, if you would mark 1 Peter 3 and verse 15. 1 Peter 3, 15. Tammy, I'm going to ask you to do Luke 6, verses 32 to 35. 32 to 35 in Luke 6. Headers in the back. So I'm going to ask Deb, if you would, to do Romans 5, verse 8. Romans 5, verse 8. Chuck, if you would do 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 7. And Linda Walker, if you'll do Colossians 4, verses 5 and 6. We're not going to have everybody reading today. So we can't stop loving our children just because they disagree with us religiously. That's lumping one disaster on top of another, isn't it? So we don't want to stop loving them, and obviously we don't want them to stop loving us. So let's start with a couple of ideas about how can we maintain a loving relationship with our adult children without sacrificing our own beliefs, because we can't do that either. Okay, we can't sacrifice our own beliefs, and we don't want to damage our own faith by compromising when we shouldn't compromise. If you look at Romans 12, verse 18, it says, if it is possible, as much as it depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Oh, we're talking about our children here. Does that apply to our children? Are children all men? Well, all men or women, yeah. So it applies. It includes our adult children. So how can we preserve peace with them without compromising the truth? So the first thing is to create and sustain a peaceful relationship. Now, sometimes that's not always within our control, but we are responsible for our part, aren't we? Isn't that what the scripture says? As much as it depends on you, maintain a peaceable relationship. Paul's encouraging Christians to do everything within their power to pursue peace, even when others, our children, may not respond in the way that we want them to. So in the context of our adult children, we may not be able to change their beliefs or alter the decisions that they've made, but we can control our tone. We can control how we react to them, and we can control our emotions, and we can control our love for them. Fred?
Kind of a counterpart to that, and I have a couple of brothers that strongly believe in this. They had children, they obeyed the gospel, and then went back to the world. And they take it much more, they are responsible for discipline. And after having talked to their children, if they wouldn't turn back around, started saying, we can no longer eat with you. We can no longer, that tough love type scenario for some kick in and say, the scriptures say, if they won't hear you, then cast them out. And I think the balance is somewhere between the two of those. There are parts of their lives that we cannot participate in because it directly might contradict what we should be doing. But there's also, Jesus invited the sinners in so that he could be an influence on them. And so I don't want this to be all one way, because some people look at it entirely from a different thing, that I have done all I could do. I've set the example. I've talked to them. I've prayed with them. I prayed for them. It's time for me to cast them out and not participate in their lives in order for them to understand what separation from the Father's love is like.
Okay. Anyone want to comment? It's a hard call. It's a hard call. I'm not gonna ask you how successful that tactic has been. I don't think it's right to ask that, because it's a decision each one of them had to make. And it's not right for us to judge whether that was the right decision or not. But it is a different approach, that's for sure. It's one I don't know that I could personally do, quite frankly, but for some they can. And there's, again, it's not our place to judge that. Marshall?
Fred's remarks bring home a lot of memories. And until I came to the wisdom and understanding that what I do as a Christian only glorifies God if it's beneficial to me and the other person. And in order for something to be beneficial, it's going to take a lot of thought, a lot of understanding, and a lot of love. And I think that's where we make our biggest mistake. We do things, and I'm not going to go into a big, long, drawn out detail, but we do things because that's what we think on the spur of the moment, rather than saying, whoa, wait a minute, let's think about this. What is the best thing to do for me and for the other person? That's when God gets glory. And that's not easy to do.
Any other comments? Danny?
Well, it puts us in a tough situation. But, we talk about Church of Christ, while they've lost ground, and I think we can see that our neighbors around us have used some of our comments and some of our actions. And just like the young lady we've got here with us today, I'm sure that she's been going to church before. I'm sure she's never seen anything like she's gonna see today. We don't have a program for young people like our competitors do. And they don't understand that. I don't know where she'll come back or not. But the best thing we can do is keep our lights shining and do what we know that needs to be done and show love. And I say it's hard to do sometimes.
Yeah.
But these are, and I've been asked, and I've thought about this. They've got these programs like Bible school. They've asked us, why don't the Church of Christ have a Bible school? I've thought about that. Are they any way that we can have a Bible school for the young kids?
Some churches do, some churches of Christ do.
But we've cut ourselves off from the community around us. Of course, our competitors are involved with the community and doing things that we've always said, well, we don't have authority to do that. And we can see we hardly ever have a visitor from the local community. If we have a visitor, it's usually out of town.
And these observations. Marshall?
John, I've mentioned many the times in my lesson, right work, wrong work. And you can honestly sometimes be scriptural and apply that scripture with the wrong tone of voice, the wrong attitude, the wrong intent, then it's wrong work, even though it's right. And I'm afraid I've seen that happen not only in my life, but generally speaking in the Lord's church. We take somebody, say, of the Baptist faith, which is prominent doctrine in this area, and we can disagree with them right quick and just cut them off. Well, I don't know about slamming the door on anybody. You may not agree with them, which is what you should do, but in an inviting term. You don't disagree with them. You teach them the truth. Then you leave it up to them. That's not easy to do. I'm not saying it's easy to do. And I'm not saying I've found the secret to understanding and reaching out. But in studying the Bible, I just can't find that you cut anybody off regardless of who they are or what they've done. You always extend the opportunity to believe and obey the gospel.
Charles, if you would go ahead and read Mark 10, verses 21, 22, please.
Looking at him, Jesus felt a love for him and said to him, "One thing you lack, go and sell all you possess and give it to the poor, and you will have treasures in heaven. Come follow me." But at these words he was saddened, and he went away grieving, for he was one who owned much property.
Now, who was Christ talking to there? We've heard this story many times. So who was Christ talking to? Young rich ruler. According to the scriptures, did Jesus have love for the rich young ruler?
Yes, he did.
Yes, he did. And he knew that what the outcome was going to be, didn't he? He knew that the rich young ruler was going to walk away sorrowfully and not do what needed to be done. Did Christ allow his love for the rich young ruler to hold back the truth? No. Can we allow the love for our children and hopefully the love they have for us, can we allow that to motivate us to hold back the truth? No, we can't.
That's not love.
That's right. That's not love.
But it'll be different from one person to another.
Correct. Absolutely. How did Jesus react when the young ruler walked away and didn't, Christ knew where he was going. He knew what the outcome was going to be. Did Christ run after him? Did he try to convince him to come back? Did he say, I really didn't mean that last part? No, Christ didn't do that. So just because we love someone doesn't mean that you automatically agree with them, and that's kind of what you all have been saying. We can't automatically agree with them, but it doesn't mean that we compromise the truth. We can't compromise the truth under any circumstances. So how do we apply this to our adult children? Fred, if you'd read 1 Peter 3:15.
But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear.
Meekness and fear. Charles, you want to say something?
Just to go back, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
The young rich man approaches Jesus and calls him teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I see that as he recognizes him as a teacher. Doesn't say Lord. So, I have two children that grew up with no religious connection or any kind of religious education. Then their father becomes a Christian. Who do they see? Dad or a Christian?
I hope they see both.
They see dad.
Okay.
Because my daughter stopped talking to me as soon as Trump got elected. She basically calls me a dumb A because of that dumb A's in the White House. So she sees me as dad, that not being a man of truth or righteous in God's eye, but she sees me as dad that no religious education. Then he comes to her in his later ages and tries to introduce God to her, who she believes she is her own God. So, it's who I think the people perceive who we are. Do we come on too strong as the holy being, God's children? Or can we adjust? I think as a Christian, we need to adjust to the person, not the whole glob of what's going on in the world here, but each individual, just as God has chosen us as an individual. He didn't say all you guys from Rogersville are going to be Christians, all you guys from upstate New York are going to be Christian. He didn't pick, it was the individual from here and here. I think we need to see our children as what they are, and be able to identify that and bring that to their attention without disrupting their feelings. You know, we can't say, well, you're an ungodly lost soul to them. That's not going to work. I can love them all I want, but if I start calling them lost souls or whatever, I've already lost. And Jesus never did this.
That's a good reason for keeping politics out of religion.
Kind of listening to Charles, it brings to mind something that I talk with my children about, and that's the mistakes I made in their lives. And where Charles might approach his children and say, I'm sorry I failed you for all those years. I'm sorry that I didn't do my responsibility. And I'm trying to make amends for that now. It's a matter of us humbling ourselves to say, you know, we made a lot of mistakes. You're proof of it because your decisions, you know, are somewhat based upon the decisions I made that were wrong. And the examples I set that were wrong. And nobody knows you as a parent better than your children. And where we might consider ourselves good parents, they may have an entirely different view and count all of our mistakes and not all of our good points. We like to see our good points. That's not what I remember of my parents. I remember good points, but I remember a lot of the mistakes they made too.
How successful have we been trying to engage our adult, non-believing children in conversation about the church or the gospel or the truth? How would you rate your own success in that? Some are probably going to rate theirs low, and some may rate theirs better than low. Chuck?
I don't know how to say this, but I don't even go there because I don't want to put myself in God's place. I feel that is, and I hope you're just asking this question to see where we stand spiritually, and not.
I'm looking for ideas because I haven't been very successful myself. So I'm looking for ideas and success stories.
And why I'm saying this is because I don't want to rate myself as someone special, and I have to credit all to God. Whatever success there is, it goes right to God. And man, I don't want any credit. I'm the vessel that He's created so that I can work for Him, and for me to qualify myself I think that's a dangerous territory because it leads to pride and arrogance and, you know, look what I did. So I'm just saying, I hope you don't take that wrong, brother.
No,
I would be afraid to do something like that. And maybe that's why, as soon as you said that, I thought, oh, I gotta share this.
Fred.
But
Oh,
in that, if I, you know, if I do rate myself, I'd say, I hope I'm in your sight, Lord, on what I'm doing. If that makes sense.
no, Fred.
I have found talking to my children, and both of them obeyed the gospel. Neither of them regularly attend church now. I can have those conversations, and they will both openly admit they ought to go to church more often. But the proof in the pudding is they never get up and go. And that's very good communication and very disheartening, and it kind of reminds me of God telling me something and me just not doing it. And so I kind of, to Chuck's point, I do judge myself sometimes. Am I being the hypocrite? Am I asking them to do stuff based upon my beliefs, and yet I'm not willing to do what God told me to do always?
Other comments? Marshall.
I've got a pretty good memory of my life. Way back to 2 and 3 years old, things had happened. And the biggest influence on my life was when I volunteered draft and went to the military. I immediately in basic training became a squad leader, acting sergeant. And leaving basic training and going to second 8 weeks, I run into a sergeant, platoon sergeant, that would borrow money off of the troops. And I knew that was wrong. So I reported it. And I hate to use the word because it's become common today, but he got deported.
Mm.
And I became the platoon sergeant, acting. And from that point on, I became very authoritative and very bossy. And that lasted all the way up to the late 1980s, when TRW decided to make a training person out of me and sent me to training school. And boy, I heard some stuff in that training school that I never heard before. But that still didn't erase all the things that had been set in place in my life. I had to live them, learn them, experience them, kind of face some of the regrets. And then I began to realize that, hey, in place of judging others, I need to be judging myself. What am I doing wrong? And the Bible is the best place I knew to turn to. It taught me a lot, simply because I listened to it. So, in all of this conversation, yes, I'm going to say loud and clear, we need to judge ourselves. We need to ask rather than tell. If you don't get it by asking, you're not gonna get it from the heart anyway. So, ask. Encourage. Nurture. That's what'll get more done, and that's what God is more proud of if I understand my Bible right. So, it don't hurt to examine yourself.
Well said.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine, Mark. That's good comments. We're up against the time limit, so maybe you are gonna have to hear a third lesson from me on this before we wrap it up.